Ravenwood Manor is perched on a desolate hill, shrouded by ancient oak trees with twisted branches like the hands of death reaching towards the sky. From afar, the mansion looks like a grim fortress amidst the wild nature, with its black stone walls seemingly built from the darkness itself. As night falls, Ravenwood appears to be cloaked in an eerie mist, sending chills down the spine of anyone gazing from a distance. Each of the mansion's large windows reflects the pale moonlight, like hollow eyes silently watching intruders. The owners of Ravenwood are William and Evelyn, an upper-class couple. William, with his elegant and authoritative appearance, is always the center of the lavish parties at the manor. However, the locals often whisper about his cold demeanor. Evelyn, his wife, is a woman renowned for her regal beauty, but equally notorious for her cruelty. Her face is always flawlessly made up, yet her eyes are hollow, filled with an undercurrent of suspicion and jealousy. She often appears in magnificent dresses, but her presence always brings a stifling, chilling sensation, like a breath of death passing by. In this vast mansion, it is not just William and Evelyn. There is also the maid, Sarah, a young girl with pure beauty and bright eyes, who is the center of attention, though not by her choice. Sarah comes from a poor family, and working at Ravenwood is her only way to support them. With long black hair, smooth white skin, and sapphire blue eyes like precious gems, Sarah often leaves people unable to look away. She always works diligently, maintaining gentle and discreet manners. But this very quality has unintentionally caught William's eye. Every time William walked through the hallway, his eyes would always, either accidentally or intentionally, linger on Sarah's face. His gaze, though not overt, carried a vague desire. Sarah always maintained proper behavior, keeping herself away from trouble, but she could not ignore the terrifying attention from William. The chilling sensation whenever he approached was like a dark cloud looming over her. Yet, Sarah continued with her work, knowing she had no other choice. The stillness and quietness of Ravenwood Manor became even more frightening whenever Evelyn appeared. Her eyes, sharp as razors, constantly monitored Sarah's every move. Every time she saw William standing near Sarah, Evelyn's face stiffened, her fake smile vanished, replaced by a cold, jealous glare. She didn't need to say a word, but Evelyn's jealousy seemed to fill the entire space, turning the thick walls of Ravenwood into a prison trapping Sarah's soul. One winter night, while Sarah was cleaning the grand hallway, the dim light from the oil lamps cast giant shadows on the walls. Suddenly, a cold gust of wind blew through, making Sarah shiver. She turned around and saw Evelyn standing right behind her, her eyes blazing in the dim light. Evelyn said nothing, just stared at Sarah with a malevolent look that froze Sarah's entire body. "Do you think you can defeat me?" Evelyn whispered, her voice soft yet echoing through the empty hallway. "You are just a servant. Never think you can change your fate." Sarah bowed her head, not daring to say a word. She felt her heart pounding, her breathing becoming heavy, as if the air around her was being sucked away. Evelyn stood there like a serpent ready to strike, then turned and walked away, leaving behind a chilling void. From that moment, Sarah realized that Ravenwood was not just a luxurious mansion. Beneath its splendid facade lay a place filled with mystery and darkness. She could clearly feel the suffocating pressure from the ancient walls, as if they were alive, watching her every move. Ravenwood Manor, with all its grandeur, was a trap, a place where darkness and jealousy silently devoured every soul. After Evelyn's jealous, warning gaze, the jealousy within her began to swell like an ever-growing storm. She could no longer bear the thought of William. the man she had spent her entire life trying to possess, seemingly captivated by a mere maid. Every time she saw William's distracted gaze lingering on Sarah, the flames of jealousy flared up inside Evelyn. It was as if Sarah's very existence was an undeniable threat, not only to her family's happiness, but also to Evelyn's honor and power at Ravenwood Manor. The jealousy gradually turned into uncontrollable rage. Evelyn knew that simply dismissing Sarah from the house would not be enough. As long as Sarah existed, William would forever remember her. No, she needed a more ruthless plan. A way to erase Sarah completely, not just from their lives, but from William's memory as well. On a gloomy evening, when the sky was as dark as ink and the wind howled through the empty hallways, Evelyn sat in the grand living room, candlelight flickering shadows across her face, giving her an eerie appearance. She began to contemplate her plan. A malice formed in her mind. She would send Sarah away as far as possible, but in a way that no one would suspect. Evelyn decided to assign the maid an absurd tasker job that could not be easily completed, hoping that Sarah would disappear forever in the process. The next morning, Evelyn summoned Sarah to the study. The large room, with its high ceiling and portraits of the Ravenwood family, made the space even more chilling. Sarah entered with a polite smile, unaware of what awaited her. Evelyn sat behind the large wooden desk, her expression reserved, but a glint of malevolence shone in her eyes. "You, Sarah," Evelyn said coldly, "I have an important task for you. This is a very crucial mission for the Ravenwood family, and I trust no one but you to carry it out." Sarah felt a bit surprised, but with her loyal and cautious nature, she bowed her head and accepted the task without a word of complaint. Evelyn handed Sarah a letter, instructing her to travel to a distant town, many miles away from Ravenwood, to deliver this letter to a family friend. The road was rough and dangerous, but Evelyn showed no hint of concern, pretending to believe that Sarah could complete the mission. "When you return, everything will be better," Evelyn said with a forced smile. But deep in her eyes was a sharp, knife-like glint. Sarah left the manor the next day, under a dim sun obscured by thick clouds. She did not know that this was the beginning of a cruel scheme. Evelyn watched her small figure from the bedroom window, her fiery eyes full of calculation. She was certain that Sarah would never return, that this journey would mark the end of the maid's existence. But Evelyn had miscalculated. Sarah, with her loyalty and determination, overcame every difficulty during the journey. After many long days facing dangerous and harsh roads, she completed the mission and returned to Ravenwood, hoping to please Evelyn. She had no idea she was returning to a horrifying nightmare that was about to begin. On the evening of Sarah's return to the manor, Evelyn, who had been certain the girl would not survive the journey, saw Sarah step through the main gate with undisguised astonishment. Her heart tightened, and a fierce anger surged within her like an unquenchable fire. This time, Evelyn could no longer restrain herself. Malicious thoughts flooded her mind. Sarah could not simply be sent away. She needed to pay the price. Evelyn decided she would not let the young maid escape her punishment, and this time she would not make any mistakes. The most ruthless plan formed clearly in her mind, and Sarah would have to face consequences more horrifying than ever. Sarah's return did not feel like a victory to her, but rather the beginning of an endless nightmare. As she crossed the threshold of Ravenwood Manor, she sensed that the atmosphere inside the house was heavier than ever. The cold gazes of the other servants, the dim light through the windows, and the black stone walls felt like a trap, ready to swallow her whole. Evelyn sat in the grand living room, on a velvet-covered armchair, her eyes fixed on Sarah with deep hatred. There was no more false smile, no more gentle words. Everything had been scorched by uncontrollable rage. As Sarah bowed her head and placed the letter on the table, fulfilling her duty, Evelyn slowly stood up, her shadow towering and pitch black in the pale light. "Do you think you can escape from me?" Evelyn's voice was sharp and icy, echoing through the empty room. Before Sarah could react, Evelyn waved a hand, signaling for two large servants to emerge from the shadows. They stepped forward, grabbing Sarah's arms and dragging her away roughly without a word of explanation. Sarah screamed in terror, but her cries dissolved into the vast space, swallowed by the thick walls. She struggled, but it was impossible to break free from the grip of those who blindly obeyed Evelyn. They dragged Sarah down into the damp, dark dungeon of Ravenwood, where no light could penetrate. The air in the dungeon was thick, foul, and suffocating. Sarah was tied to an old wooden chair, her limbs bound so tightly that the ropes left marks on her skin. Her eyes, full of fear, darted around, only to see rusty torture devices, a grim reminder of the horrific fate that awaited her. Evelyn descended the staircase slowly, each of her footsteps echoing ominously in the silence. Thud, thud. Her face was expressionless, cold as stone, but her eyes gleamed with cruelty. She approached Sarah, leaned down close to her, and whispered, her tone as sharp as a blade. "I gave you a chance. You should never have come back. But now, you will pay the price." Evelyn gave the order, and a servant appeared, holding a gleaming pair of iron pliers, the metal glinting in the dim light. Sarah screamed in sheer terror, but no one cared. The servant's rough hand grasped hers tightly. Her slender fingers trembled desperately, but they could not escape their fate. The servant clamped the pliers tightly onto Sarah's fingernail, and with a violent motion, he pulled out the first nail. The excruciating pain felt like thousands of knives piercing through her finger, causing Sarah to let out an uncontrollable scream. Fresh blood from the torn nail dripped onto the floor, soaking into the rusted stains on the ground. But this was only the beginning. The second, third nails were pulled out one by one. Each time the iron pliers clamped down and yanked. Sarah's cries of agony echoed throughout the dungeon, but no one came to save her. The servant continued his task with a cold detachment, as if this was just another daily routine. When the final nail was removed, Sarah's fingers were crimson, swollen, and drenched in blood. But the torture was not over. Evelyn signaled, and another servant stepped forward, holding a sharp razor in his hand. He moved behind Sarah and began shaving off sections of her long, black hair. The cold blade slid across Sarah's scalp, leaving a stinging sensation. Locks of hair fell to the floor like strands of severed lifelines. In just a moment, Sarah's thick, smooth hair was gone, leaving her head bald and bare, as if a vital part of her identity had been stripped away. But it didn't stop there. Evelyn ordered them to continue. Sarah's long, curved eyelashes were also cut off, leaving her eyes exposed, red with pain and fear. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but no one paused. The most brutal part was yet to come. Evelyn approached, holding a thin, sharp knife in her hand. "So that you can never smile in front of me again," she whispered, and dragged the knife from the corners of Sarah's mouth, tearing the sides of her face all the way to her ears. The pain was beyond imagination. Sarah screamed, but the scream came from a mouth torn open, turning into a gruesome, blood-filled hiss. After torturing her to the point where there was nothing left to destroy, Evelyn looked down at Sarah. who was now nothing but a broken shell, stripped of the beauty that had once captivated William. But Evelyn's cruelty did not stop there. She wanted Sarah to vanish completely from this world, as if she had never existed. Evelyn gave the final order. Sarah was to be buried alive. The servants dragged Sarah, now almost entirely devoid of strength, to a hidden wall deep within the manor. The wall had been prepared in advance, leaving just enough space to shove Sarah inside. They tied her tightly, threw her into the wall, and began sealing it. Bricks and cement slowly enclosed Sarah in the cold darkness. Only a small air vent was left, allowing her to survive in excruciating pain, but never escape. Sarah's nightmare had now become reality. She was imprisoned in darkness, abandoned to both physical and mental torment. Each of her feeble breaths sank into the deep darkness of Ravenwood Manor. After Sarah's tragic departure, the atmosphere at Ravenwood Manor seemed heavier and more ominous than ever. The black stone walls of the mansion, already cold, now appeared to absorb Sarah's pain and resentment, exhaling a sense of unease that enveloped the entire space. The servants, who had previously seen Ravenwood as merely a harsh home, now began to sense the presence of something vague, invisible, yet very real. During the day, everything went on as usual, but when night fell, strange occurrences began to appear. Every night, as darkness spread through the vast hallways of Ravenwood, eerie whispers started emanating from the walls. At first, there were faint sounds, like the wind slipping through the cracks, but gradually, they grew clearer. It was a chilling whisper, broken and fragmented, as if someone was trying to convey a message from the other side. "Help me. Save me." Sarah's choked, pain-filled cries seemed to echo from within the cold stone walls, sending shivers down the spine of anyone brave enough to listen. The servants passing through the hallways felt their skins sting from the chill emanating from the stone walls. They tried to ignore the sounds, but the more they did, the clearer and closer the cries and moans became. Some recounted that, at times, they even heard faint footsteps, soft as if someone was walking round in the dark, despite everyone having gone to bed. One night, a young maid named Clara, who had remained mentally unscathed until now, lost her composure when she heard scratching sounds coming from the wall near her bedroom. The noise was like nails scraping hard against the wall, as if someone was desperately trying to escape. Clara trembled, stepped out of bed, pressed her ear to the wall to listen more closely. And at that very moment, a cold, icy sigh whispered in her ear. "I can't breathe." Clara screamed in horror and collapsed to the floor. From that night on, the poor girl always felt as if someone was watching her, sometimes even sensing a cold breath right at the back of her neck. Unable to endure it any longer, Clara left Ravenwood just a few days later, but the events did not stop with her. As time passed, the strange occurrences grew more frequent. The lights in the hallways suddenly went out for no apparent reason, and candles often extinguished as if blown out by a gust of wind, despite all the windows being closed. The servants began to whisper among themselves about shadowy figures gliding through the night, but none dared to confront the truth that they all knew deep down. Sarah had never left. Her vengeful spirit still lingered within the walls, as if waiting for an opportunity to exact revenge. Evelyn was not spared from the haunting. Every night, as she lay in the grand bedroom, she no longer felt safe in her own home. On some nights, as she lay in bed with the blanket pulled up to her chin, she would hear faint laughter coming from the corner of the room. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakably a woman's laughter, soft, yet full of mockery, as if ridiculing Evelyn's very existence. She began to have strange dreams. In the dreams, Evelyn found herself walking down the hallways of Ravenwood, but no light illuminated the way. Darkness engulfed her, and from within it, Sarah's eyes that had lost their innocence and now brimmed with deep resentment stared directly at Evelyn. Sarah said nothing in the dreams. She just stood there, grinning wickedly with her mouth torn open to the sides of her cheeks, then disappeared into the darkness. Evelyn tried to ignore these occurrences, convincing herself that they were mere illusions created by her own guilt. But deep down, she knew the truth. Sarah had not disappeared. She could feel the presence of the maid who had been buried alive, could feel the cold gaze watching her from within the very wall she had used to imprison Sarah. Yet Evelyn would never admit to that fear. She believed that as long as she didn't speak of it, it would remain a mere hallucination and eventually fade away. However, what Evelyn did not realize was that Sarah's resentment was not something that could be ignored. It did not weaken over time. On the contrary, it grew stronger each time it was dismissed. And then, the eerie sounds, the cold whispers, were just the beginning. Far more horrifying things were drawing near, and Sarah's ghost would not let anyone at Ravenwood Manor find peace until she had her revenge. The nights at Ravenwood Manor grew increasingly terrifying. The whispers and eerie laughter from the walls were no longer faint sounds. They became clearer, more frightening. Every step taken in the pitch-dark hallways of the mansion seemed to carry the presence of death, and the servants began to realize that they were no longer safe in this house. Martha, one of Evelyn's most loyal servants, was the first to disappear. That night, as usual, Martha was cleaning the main hallway after everyone had gone to bed. The candlelight danced on the cold stone walls, casting strange shadows, as if the house itself had come to life and was mocking her. Martha, who was not easily haunted, tried to ignore the strange occurrences that had been happening over the past few weeks. She told herself that she just needed to finish her work, and everything would be fine. UT tonight was different. As Martha passed by a wall near the entrance to the dungeon, she suddenly heard faint laughter. The sound made the blood in her veins freeze, for it was not the laughter of a human. It was shrill, hissing through clenched teeth, as if coming from a creature no longer belonging to this world. Martha froze, listening more intently, and felt the light footsteps, as if someone was following her. Her heart pounded in her chest. A chill crawled up her spine as she realized that the sound did not come from any other servant. Martha turned around, but the long hallway behind her was empty. Not a shadow, not a trace. Only the candlelight dimming and the darkness seemingly growing thicker. She began to walk faster, trying to leave the area, but the footsteps continued to follow her, closer, more hurried. Each of her steps was now accompanied by eerie laughter, hissing from the dark corners where the candlelight couldn't reach. Martha panicked. She started to run, no longer caring about her task. She just wanted to escape this terrifying place. But the laughter grew louder, as if it was right behind her. Martha tried to scream, but the sound caught in her throat, unable to escape. As she reached the end of the hallway, a cold gust of wind blew past, and before her, out of the darkness, a pale, fleshless hand suddenly reached out and grabbed her wrist. The hand, with no nails, was nothing but slimy, blood-soaked fingers. An icy sensation ran up Martha's arm, pulling her back, pressing her against the pitch-black wall. Martha screamed in despair, but her voice was swallowed by the dense darkness. She was dragged deep into the wall, into the endless void, before her eyes could even comprehend what was happening. In an instant, Martha vanished from the hallway, leaving no trace behind. The next morning, no one could find her. The other servants began to whisper about Martha's disappearance, but none dared to speak the truth. Fear filled the air as, night after night, more servants met the same fate. They heard the laughter, the footsteps, and then no one survived to tell what had happened. Another young maid, cleaning the windows at night, was suddenly yanked back. The mysterious disappearances of the servants quickly became a nightmare that spread throughout the mansion. At first, it was explained that they had fled in fear, but no one believed it. Everyone knew that there was something invisible but powerful force haunting each person, pulling them into the darkness. Those dark days became even more terrifying when the remaining servants began to leave Ravenwood en masse, unwilling to stay in the cursed house. Ravenwood Manor now stood desolate and cold. The once bustling hallways were now empty, with only the howling wind passing through the windows and the incessant whispers from within the walls. The rooms that had once been warm were now icy, as if the house itself was wilting with time. Evelyn, the sole remaining master of the mansion, began to feel Sarah's presence more clearly. The ghost of the maid who had been tortured and buried alive was no longer a faint haunting. It had become an undeniable reality. Evelyn tried to maintain a calm exterior, but deep down, she knew that Sarah had returned, and she would never find peace again. When the house was left with only Evelyn, Sarah's eerie laughter became even clearer. The soft footsteps echoed behind her every night. But Evelyn had nowhere to run, and she knew that sooner or later, Sarah would come for her. The darkness of Ravenwood Manor increasingly surrounded Evelyn, like invisible claws slowly closing in on her. And now, there was no one left to witness her downfall. That night, Ravenwood Manor was engulfed in an eerie silence. No more faint footsteps, no more eerie laughter or whispers from the walls. Evelyn huddled in the large bedroom, her heart pounding so fast that it felt like it might explode in her chest. The air in the room grew oppressive, weighed down by something invisible yet terrifying. The dim candlelight on the bedside table barely illuminated a small part of the room. Darkness enveloped everything, as if it was swallowing the space around her. Evelyn had tried to calm herself, to convince herself that it was all an illusion, that everything was just a product of her fear. But she knew that tonight, the most dreadful thing was closer than ever. Evelyn sat on the bed, trembling as she stared at the closed bedroom door. Every nerve in her body tense, awaiting the inevitable. Suddenly, the air in the room turned icy cold, as if a freezing wind had blown through, even though no window was open. Evelyn shivered, feeling her breath freeze. The dense air around her began to waver, as if an invisible entity was approaching. Suddenly, a faint sound came from the corner of the room where the light couldn't reach. Evelyn turned her head, and in the deep darkness, her eyes began to make out a shape slowly emerging. At first, it was just blurry outlines, but then the shadow became clearer, forming a figure that was painfully familiar to her. Sarah. But this was no longer the young, gentle maid Evelyn once knew. Before her stood Sarah, in the form of a vengeful entity, a demon deprived of life. Her long hair had been shaved off, leaving her head covered in jagged wounds. Sarah's eyes were hollow, like two endless pits, devoid of any gaze yet piercing deep into Evelyn. Her mouth remained torn to the ears, twisted into a grotesque smile that sent a chill through Evelyn's flesh. Every cut, every mark of torture was visible on Sarah's body, but there was no sign of penonly and unrelenting hatred. "You will pay for what you have done," Sarah hissed. her voice seething through clenched teeth, escaping from a mouth slashed to the ears. The sound was as cold as nails scraping on glass, echoing through the room and forcing Evelyn to clutch her head in despair. Evelyn backed away, step by step, her eyes never leaving the horrifying figure of Sarah. I didn't mean to," she stammered, her voice weak and panicked. I just wanted to protect my family." "Family," Sarah sneered, her twisted smile making everything even more terrifying. "You stole my life. You buried me alive in that dark wall. Do you think you can escape?" Evelyn tried to run, but her legs felt frozen to the floor, unable to move. She screamed in horror, but no sound escaped her throat. Sarah moved closer, each step light yet as heavy as impending death. Her pitch-black eyes bore into Evelyn, pulling her into an invisible abyss. Evelyn's entire body froze in fear. Her heart pounded wildly, her breathing grew frantic and desperate. But the more she tried to breathe, the harder it was to draw air into her lungs. Each of Sarah's steps made Evelyn feel the approach of death. The room became suffocating, as if every bit of air was being drained away by Sarah's presence. "You buried me?" Sarah said, her voice deep and echoing like a sound from the underworld. "Now, it's your turn to experience that." Evelyn let out a desperate scream, but it got caught in her throat as Sarah reached out. Sarah's blood-soaked, nail-less hands touched Evelyn's neck, and instantly, she felt a wave of icy coldness run down her spine, as if every ounce of life within her was being drained. But the greatest horror was yet to come. Evelyn struggled, trying to break free from Sarah's grasp, but her legs remained immobile. From the depths of the darkness, strange noises began to echo whispers, footsteps of the servants who had disappeared before. They were all returning, but not in their human forms. Dark silhouettes, spirits that Sarah had dragged along with her, emerged in the room, surrounding Evelyn. Their eyes were hollow, their faces twisted and filled with resentment. Sarah's cold hand tightened around Evelyn's neck, her hollow eyes staring directly into Evelyn's, never looking away. Evelyn felt the last breath being pulled out of her, death looming closer. She wanted to scream, to beg, but no sound came out. Sarah leaned in, the torn smile clearly visible on her sinister face. "You cannot escape," she whispered. "You will stay here with me forever." Evelyn managed to let out a weak groan before the darkness completely consumed her. Evelyn stood in the middle of the large bedroom, darkness around her swallowing everything in sight. She could feel the icy presence of Sarah right beside her, every breath of the deadly maid radiating a chilling coldness that made the air in the room more suffocating than ever. Evelyn tried to step back, but her legs felt frozen, unable to lift even an inch. In her despair, she looked around, hoping to find an escape. But suddenly, a strange sound echoed from beneath the floor, like the creaking of wood and the grinding of stone. Before Evelyn's eyes, the floor began to shift, cracks spreading from every direction, as if it could no longer bear her weight. She looked down, her eyes wide with horror, as skeletal hands emerged from the cracks, grabbing hold of her ankles. The bony, dry hands, with cracked skin and exposed bones, gripped her tightly from all sides. Evelyn struggled, but the more she thrashed, the tighter the hands squeezed, pinning her to the ground. Their touch was as cold as ice, with a supernatural strength, pulling her downwards. In a moment of sheer terror, Evelyn realized these hands were not human. They belonged to the souls of the missing servants, those whom Sarah had captured and tortured in the endless darkness. Evelyn screamed in panic, her cry echoing throughout the room. but no one could hear it. The hands continued to rise, more and more, emerging from the floor as if the very ground had come to life. They pulled Evelyn down slowly, from her feet to her knees, then to her waist. Sharp fingers dug into her flesh, tearing at it mercilessly, leaving deep, crimson wounds. Evelyn struggled, reaching out, her nails clawing at the floor, but only adding to the agony. "Let me go," she screamed, but her voice was swallowed up by the thick, oppressive air, leaving nothing but despair. The room now seemed to spin around Evelyn. The thick stone walls of Ravenwood seemed to close in, like a cage tightening around her. The eerie whispers, Sarah's mocking laughter, echoed from all directions, reverberating through the darkened room, taunting and mocking Evelyn. In her panic, she turned to see Sarah standing in the darkness, watching it all with a twisted smile on her slashed face. Sarah's hollow eyes stared directly at Evelyn, devoid of any pity. Evelyn wanted to scream again, but her throat was blocked by terror, unable to utter a single word. "You will not escape," Sarah said, her voice echoing like a sound from hell, cold and full of hatred. "You will stay here with me, forever." And with those words, the floor beneath Evelyn collapsed entirely. She was pulled down, falling into a pitch-black abyss. Darkness engulfed her, no light, no way out. The ghostly hands continued to drag her deeper into the earth, as if Ravenwood Manor itself were a living entity, swallowing Evelyn into Sarah's endless resentment. Evelyn's final scream echoed through the mansion, reverberating off the cold stone walls, but gradually faded away, giving way to a deathly silence. She sank deep into the darkness, consumed by the nightmare she had created, with no hope of escaping Sarah's revenge. As the room returned to silence, there was no trace of Evelyn or the ghostly hands. Ravenwood Manor sank back into its eerie stillness. Only the eternal darkness remained, and Sarah's twisted, grotesque smile still lingered in the corner of the room, a reminder that the revenge had never truly ended. Evelyn had vanished completely into the earth, leaving no trace, and with every sound that echoed from the walls, it was known that Sarah's vengeful spirit remained, continuing to haunt Ravenwood Manor until all those who had committed such atrocities faced their horrific punishment. After Evelyn's horrifying death, no one had the courage to step into Ravenwood Manor. The mansion, already dark and foreboding, now lay in even deeper shadows and mysteries that defied explanation. The absence of Evelyn quickly spread throughout the small town. The people nearby didn't know exactly what had happened in that house, but they sensed a palpable change. The atmosphere around Ravenwood felt heavier, more oppressive than ever. At first, the townsfolk simply avoided Ravenwood. No one dared to go near, especially after nightfall, whenever the faint moonlight shone on the mansion's cold, black stone walls. People said they could see ghostly figures gliding past the windows. Whispers and the sobbing of a woman echoed in the night, shattering the town's silence. Soft footsteps along the hallways sometimes resounded for just a moment, but it was enough to send chills down the spine of anyone who heard them. Stories about Ravenwood began to spread. People said that on quiet, late nights, the image of Sarah, not the innocent maid she once was, but a demon with a slashed smile and hollow eyes of fawn, appeared around the house. She wandered between the stone walls, her pale, nailless hands gliding over objects before slowly fading into the darkness. Many believed that Sarah was still trapped within the house, forever consumed by hatred, unable to escape. From then on, Ravenwood was not just abandoned. It became a cursed house, a place no one dared to approach. Anyone passing by felt an invisible, icy presence filled with deep resentment. Those curious enough to explore the mansion's mysteries vanished mysteriously, never to return. A group of young people, intending to test their bravery, decided to enter Ravenwood on a full moon night. However, the next morning, the townsfolk found only their bicycles and belongings abandoned at the gate. Not a single person from that group was ever found again. Since then, the house became even more terrifying in people's eyes. Rumors of Sarah's appearance in a demonic form spread everywhere. It was said that sometimes, at midnight, if you listened carefully, you could hear the agonizing screams of the souls trapped inside. Those passing by at night would occasionally hear eerie laughter coming from within the house. But when they looked inside, everything was shrouded in darkness. Some townsfolk dared to approach Ravenwood during the day to investigate, but each time they neared the rusty iron gate, they felt a chilling cold run down their spine. Some claimed they heard soft whispers right by their ears, as if someone was watching and waiting. The bravest ones, when they reached the front door, said that upon touching the doorknob, they felt as if an invisible hand gripped them, pulling them inside. The small town surrounding Ravenwood gradually sank into an unspoken fear. No one dared to go near the mansion, and the entire town began to regard it as a forbidden place. Even during the day, people avoided the road leading to the house, fearing that its curse might spread to them. The trees around the house withered, devoid of life. The iron gate had long been locked, yet sometimes people would mysteriously find it ajar, as if inviting curious souls to enter. As time passed, the house continued to decay, but the ghost of Sarah remained. The souls of the servants who vanished along with Evelyn were forever imprisoned in Sarah's ruthless vengeance. Ravenwood Manor was now a place that no one dared to mention. It was remembered only as a warning. Never venture into Ravenwood, or you will never return. Ravenwood Manor was no longer just an abandoned house. It was a cursed place, where resentment clung eternally to the walls, where the cries and eerie laughter of Sarah still echoed through the darkness, warning anyone who dared step into the realm of her revenge.